In our Focus on Life segment today, we feature Helen Alvare, a law professor at George Mason University. Alvare has assisted the Holy See on women's issues and the USCCB on pro-life issues. She calls herself a new feminist. Recently, she spoke with students and faculty at Assumption College about some pretty heavy topics: contraception, abortion, and the effect both have had on marriage in our society. Reel to Reel's Carolee Mcgrath has more.
Even as an adolescent, thought that the church would be my other vocation. I wasn't sure if I would be a sister or married, but I knew I would work for the church.
And many would agree God has used Helen Alvare's talents to work for the church in a mighty way. Alvare, an associate professor of law at George Mason University, came to Assumption College in Worcester not to tickle the ears of secular society, but to speak the truth about marriage, abortion, and birth control.
We see practically the fallout of it in the world. And I already said less and later marriage, more divorce, etc. And with that comes a lot more sexual experimentation, a lot more depression, out-of-wedlock births, sexually transmitted diseases, abortion and post-abortion distress, and a lack of sympathy and understanding of men for women and women for men.
Alvare, who assisted the Holy See on pro-life and women's issues, and who worked for the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops to promote the sanctity of life, focused her talk on what she calls an incredible mistrust among the sexes. She says the breakdown stems from all of the things secular society accepts as the norm: birth control, cohabitation, and abortion.
My focus is on what is being called gender mistrust, a seeming breakdown in good relations between men and women, and by this I mean on the romantic plane, on the level of marriage.
Even though Alvare was raised in a big Catholic family, she told students at Assumption that she never used to believe in marriage. She never wanted to have children and didn't agree with the church's teaching on birth control.
I had concluded that I, for one, would not join their little plot to subjugate women by marrying one of them and having their children. That is, of course, before I met my husband, who really single-handedly convinced me that men could be a little bit wonderful, maybe even more, as good children. And that for me, there was a path to more joy, more purpose, and yes, shockingly, more authentic freedom.
Alvare calls herself a new feminist, a phrase coined by Pope John Paul II. She says Catholics need to be taught theology of the body. In a series of 129 short talks between 1979 and 1984, Pope John Paul explained how God made people body, soul, and spirit. He also spoke about marriage and the Church's teaching on contraception. Often when people think of theology of the body, natural family planning comes to mind. NFP is the Church's approved way for couples to either achieve or avoid a pregnancy. Alvare says all Catholics need to be schooled in theology of the body.
If you don't bring it in at the level of formation, trying to cram it into some couple of weeks or weekend premarital formation, getting a brief quote out in the news media about it occasionally, that's not enough. That doesn't do it. We have to form people in this.
Alvare says that even people outside of the Catholic Church are starting to take a serious look at theology of the body. She says that's because the statistics show that contraception is not doing the job that many people thought it would do. In a recent article published in Public Discourse, Alvare used the government's own numbers. Since the federal government began its campaign to provide a low-cost or free contraception under a program called Title V of the Public Health Service Act in 1970, non-marital births were not prevented, but tripled. According to the Department of Health and Human Services, non-marital births in 1970 made up 11% of all births. In 2008, 41% of babies were born out of wedlock.
The studies show that the more emergency contraception they stick in literally into the pockets of teenage girls, the more pregnancy and abortions they get.
But Alvare knows it's an uphill battle to convince people, even Catholics, that contraception may not be the answer. In fact, according to the Guttmacher Institute, a reproductive rights research organization, their study shows only 2% of Catholic couples practice NFP, a teaching she says she once struggled with herself until she learned more about it.
I am not saying this is easy in all cases. I am not saying it is not countercultural. It is. I am not saying that it isn't something very different from the way they're doing things now. I never try and soft pedal it. And part of the reason I don't soft pedal it is because I'm not someone who bought these teachings.
Christopher Kloft, an associate professor of theology at Assumption, teaches theology of the body.
The data is pretty clear that compared to the 50% divorce rate that we are experiencing in the United States, that in natural family planning couples, the divorce rate's under 2%.
Even some of the students listening to Alvare's talk started to think twice about everything they've heard before about safe sex.
You think that a lot of people get divorced because there's no communication, but she talked about how there was no cohabitation. That is one of the biggest reasons why people end up being divorced.
Alvare says the numbers don't lie. She hopes more Catholics will realize the truth about contraception and abortion and come to see that God has a better plan for men and women, even if it's contrary to conventional wisdom. Reporting for Reel to Reel, I'm Carolee Mcgrath.